Um, Welcome everyone. Good morning to folks in India. Good afternoon. We have people joining in from other parts of the world. Good evening to everyone. Welcome to our monthly lecture series, ARC monthly lecture series. This lecture series was started in November 2024. Today we have with us Dr. Soibam Haripriya. She's joining in from Delhi. She's an assistant professor at IIIT Delhi. The title of today's lecture is Spilled Blood, Friendship and Kinship in Sight of Violence. Before we talk more about today's speaker and today's lecture, let me share a few words about Advanced Research Consortium Library and Archives. This is nearly 20 years old research consortium based in Imphal, and it became a public library in 2022. Our library is open to everyone. You just have to um, join. You can join using our Google form link, which is being posted here in our chat box. We charge a one-time fee of 200 rupees. That's all. You have access to reading space. You can also borrow 3 books one time. It's a vibrant community of scholars, artists, journalists, people from all walks of life. You can find our address and area other detailed. One of our interns will be posting more details here, including the Instagram link. I also want to introduce our co-host today, Ningtu Khongjam Girija, who just completed her master's in political science from University of Delhi, and also one of our active members of the library, helping us planning this lecture series and many other events. And yeah, over to you, Girija.
Yeah, thank you, Dharnapal. Now I'll introduce the speaker. So, Dr. Soibam Haripriya is a poet and an assistant professor at the Department of Social Sciences and Humanities in the Presta Institute of Information Technology, Delhi. She has completed her Ph.D. from the Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics. She was a Fulbright-Nehru postdoctoral fellow at the South Asia Institute, University of Texas at Austin during 2023 to 20 sorry to, between during 2022 to 2023. She was also the FWO postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Conflict and Development Studies, Ghent University, Belgium, and a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. Dr. Haripriya has taught at the Center for Sociology and Social Anthropology, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Guwahati campus, and Gender Studies program, School of Human Studies, Ambedkar University. Her work has appeared in several anthologies, including Centerpiece, New Writing and Art from Northeast India, published by Juban in 2017. 40 Under 40, an anthology of post-globalization poetry published in 2016, and A Map Called Home, published in 2018. She has also been published in Muse India in May to June 2019 publication, Poetry at Sangam, July 2019 publication, and the Sahitya Academy Journal of Indian Literature. Her research interests are gender, violence, Northeast India, poetry and fiction in ethnography of violence, and digital ethnography. So I believe the session will be engaging and fruitful. So over to you, Jay.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible and visible. Yeah, thank you so much to the Advanced Research Consortium Library and Archives Manipur for bringing all of us together, and thank you especially to the organizing team. So the talk today is based on a fieldwork this is part of my PhD research, but something that I did not include in my PhD. When Professor Anuja Agrawal of Delhi School of Economics was bringing in a volume together on family, and Professor Sujata Patel was the series editor, we had a discussion. I was not part of the initial and sort of initial volume, but I presented a paper in IIAS where I spoke about how the nature of the family is very different in conflict sites. The nature of friendship also is very different in conflict sites. And, and that family and kinship studies in sociology has not paid heed to, so there is a lot of, literature around domestic violence. There's a lot of, when we talk about violence and family, a lot of the scholarship is around domestic violence. And I wanted to argue for the space of state violence and its impact on families and friendship, because that is not something that kinship studies in India has taken up to the degree that, to the degree that it should be taken. It has not been given importance to the degree that it should be given. And that is where this today's talk, Spilt, Blood, Friendship and Kinship is in a regime of violence stems from. So in this talk, I'll be reading out the paper. In this paper, what I want to do is to understand the context of prolonged political conflict and violence, and how intimate relations of kinship and friendship are inflected in such situations where continuous negotiation with trust and skepticism become foundational to these relationships. And I wanted to place friendship and kinship in this very skepticism that sometimes translates into suspicion. And I relate the suspicion to the presence of martial laws like AFSPA, but not only AFSPA. Barwa in his latest book has sort of given the concept of the AFSPA regime. So the AFSPA regime is not the law, but an entire socio-political and cultural space that martial law co-constitutes and bring into being. And also, this paper is an extrapolation from several other studies, most recently that of Athar Zia's work on disappearance in Kashmir. And I argue that such scholarship points to the idea that patriarchal protection, there is an idea of patriarchal protection of the family, but such idea is elusive in a context of violence and state violence in particular. The most ordinary of kin relations, where one expects the patriarchal protection of the domestic from the world at large, is not a given, especially in areas which are defined as disturbed areas. Employing conflict as the larger framework within which friendship breaks down and kinship, based on notions of shared blood, transforms into spilled blood. I argue that the AFSPA regime changes and marginalizes the spaces of relations of friendship and family. And that is where I thought I'll title it Spilled Blood, because the idea of shared blood and substance is foundational to the idea of friendship. But here I want to talk not about shared blood, but spilled blood. The glorification of the heterosexual family as the sacrosanct unit of the nation state falls short in sites declared disturbed areas by state laws. For grounding the state as a site of violence, therefore, I interrogate the consequence of living in sites of violence on families, kin relations, and friendships. And what do I do in this text is methodologically, I look at various other texts, such as that of fiction. And I wanted to employ fiction greatly because, and I'll explain this as why this is methodologically a necessity in doing research in sites which are more vulnerable than others. Until recently, social anthropology has looked at friendship as a residual category, lower in hierarchy as compared to kinship. Defining who is a friend and what it means to be a friend is difficult due to the ambiguity of the category of friendship. Many anthropologists have written on the functional similarity of kinship and friendship. I quote, friendship in developmental history, in psychological analysis, and in social fact is an extension of the relationship within the family circle. So we have in sociology one of this classic work called Street Corner Society. And it's very interesting because while I feel that while the text is all about friendship of, corner boys, working class boys or men, but they refer to each other as corner street boys. While they were organized around peer group friendship, reciprocity, and mutual obligations, the text itself was not thought of as an ethnography of friendship. For Desai and Killick, Friendship is interesting precisely because it evades definition. The ways in which friendship acts to express fixity and fluidity in diverse social world is both exciting and problematic for the people that practice friendship and for the social scientists that studies it. Friendship as a way of relating cannot escape comparison to kinship. Why I spend some time talking about friendship and comparing it with kinship is also because in this paper, I am arguing that when we look at kinship, we should also include other relationalities, other relationships which are becoming important now, such as that of friendship. And that is why I'll spend a few minutes talking about friendship and its comparison to kinship. Drawing from classical Indian thought, Bhikkhu Parekh places friendship at par with kinship. I quote, "A close friend is a brother. One not so close is like a brother. In any case, friendship is assimilated into kinship. At its best, friendship, a purely voluntary relationship, acquires the thickness of blood and the solidity of natural ties.
India
A
will
friend is a
I'm gonna mute. Somebody's mic is not mute. Can you please? Okay, I'm gonna mute. Who's this person? Sorry.
I'll continue.
Okay, yeah. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, so in either case, friendship is assimilated into kinship. At its best, friendship, a purely voluntary relationship, acquires the thickness of blood and the solidity of natural ties. So you can see here in this quote also this, coming back to the idea of blood and shared substance as important for kinship. So even when we are talking about friendship and comparing it to kinship, the metaphor of the blood is very important because it's saying that something which is voluntary now acquires the thickness of blood. And blood is something that is thought to solidify these ties, right? A friend is an adopted member of the family. He shares food with the family, an important privilege in a caste society with its rigid taboos, close quote. So what all these scholars are talking about is how for this Indian scholars looking at friendship and looking at other kinds of intersectionality of identities, most importantly that of caste. And I think for Indian scholars, caste is an important inflection to friendship because sharing food and is a rigid caste boundary which seems subverted in certain categories of friendship where friendship acquires the thickness of blood. A strict distinction. So what they just a second. What they say is friendship is sorry. Just yeah, sorry about that. A strict distinction between kinship as formalized, socially and legally legible fixed relations, and friendship as voluntary, informal, and therefore ambiguous, is not necessarily tenable. So, yeah. In the context of my study, this becomes evident when we look at some of the terms in Meitei where the terms that are used to refer to friends, itau is gender neutral, imanaba, ba is the male suffix, imanabi, b is the female suffix, and e means blood, right? So this prefix of e is on all kin relations, ima, ipa, imanabi, right? And also itau, which is friendship, right? So this equation of sameness of blood of the self with that of friendship places friendship on par with kinship. This is my argument that, when other scholars talk about friendship acquiring the solidity and the thickness of blood relations, we, for us, for the Métis as a community, we have already incorporated this idea of, the friend being given a kin terminology already in language. Usage of kin-like terminologies such as a kin-like relatedness, the inevitability of the sameness of blood, right? So there are other formal terms like maru, which refers to friends, but the word which is most commonly in circulation and everyday usage is that of imanabi, imanaba, right? So the skin-like closeness of friendship gets an added inflection in highly militarized context of AFSPA in operation in the states of Northeast, as both friendship and kins face increasing state surveillance. Works on friendship and kinship in such a field needs to foreground the law and the military administrative nexus through which these relations are governed. State regulation of friendship endanger mutual suspicion and betrayal by shifting the way in which mutual social obligations are organized. Now, by this, I'm not making this claim that mistrust is specific to friendship fostered in the context of militarized situation. I quote, both trust and mistrust can coexist in friendship relations, maybe because people distinguish several dimensions in their relationships, close quote. So here I'll come right away to, I'll just make a small caveat here as to why I look at young men and not women, even though I understand that the friendship of women is very much sort of, there's a qualitative difference in both. For women, the threat of violence is articulated as the risk of sexual assault by state forces and non-state armed groups, and the escalation in incidences of domestic violence due to the context of political instability. Documentation of the same gets further emphasized as opposed to other aspects and consequences of protracted violence. And therefore, again, when one is doing research, you will find that most of the work around women and violence is on these aspects, right? Domestic violence, state violence by armed groups, whether it be by state or non-state, right? So other dimensions are missing in the scholarship. How young men and women conduct their friendship is quite different from in the given circumstances. Citing concerns for their safety, women's mobility is more restricted and their relationship are subjected to a different kind of scrutiny as opposed to men. But I want to say that this, this talk today focuses only on men's relationship. I think all of us here are aware of the context of AFSPA. So I won't spend time looking at the context of militarization, but I would just want to talk about something which is, derived from Taylor Sherman's work on what she calls a coercive network. And by coercive network, she refers to interconnected institutions, which is law and other such practices of the state that is part of the state's repertoire of coercing people, and how the state is not the state out there. I think in many times when we are looking at the violence and in Kashmir, in Manipur, in many other places in India, we think of the state as centrally located elsewhere, but we sort of deny the presence of insider, quote unquote, insider, who are also representative of the state, insiders who are also, who are part of the ideology of the state in a much more exaggerated form, right? The state is constructed and constituted by its everyday practices, disciplining the population and reiterating its authority through processes that order space and time is part of the everyday processes of the state. This also includes corruption and coercion, right? Both, I would say, very strongly present in the field that I talk about. So what I want to do here is to say that AFSPA as a law is an important, important conceptually for us to spend time thinking, but also to understand that by law, we do not mean the letter of the law and, what its enforcement leads to. but also to understand this as a part of a coercive network that is part of the ASPA regime. So by this, we also think of acts of corruption, acts of coercion, acts of how governmentality is practiced in these spaces. Manipur is one of the states that comprises the northeastern region, where the coercive repertoire of the state is evident. The Kin catchphrase, Seven Sisters, originating in the 1970s, through which the region continues to be known, was coined to unite the region as well as caution against the threat of dismembering the nation state into separate constituencies. Born at the time when new states were carved out by reorganizing the state of Assam, Sean Doddy observed that the term was presumably meant to encourage coalition building among the newly born federated states of the so-called Northeast. Doddy examines this term of siblingship, right? Seven sisters, siblings, as placing the northeastern states in a daughter position vis-a-vis national kinship, which he uses to mean, I quote, the filial idioms through which political belonging and mutual dwellings, destinies are symbolized, and how they organize latent assumptions about how one can and should relate to others within the fait accompli of nationalized space. Right, so I found this understanding of Seven Sisters important for me to just mention here, because I'm looking at kinship, I'm looking at friendship, and deriving from Sean's Doddy's position, if the daughter position with reference to national kinship is one aspect of the state, then we also understand this hierarchy, right? The state being the paternal, figure, and the Northeast being the daughter position. And we know that in, the masculinized patriarchal state discourse, the daughter, of course, has less power than sons, right? So I just skip this to sort of, so the Seven Sisters are in a kinship, are in a relationship of kin hierarchy vis-a-vis national kinship, and have to accommodate and absorb the nation's sexual, I quote, sexual, economic, geopolitical, militaristic, and increasingly racialized anxieties and desire, close quote. Given this context of gender belonging to the nation state, what I want to look at is the coercive repertoire that includes the threat of death manifested in relations of friendship and kinship in Manipur. Right. So I come to the first section here, titled Performing Familial Care. In this section, I draw from secondary literature to look at the repercussion of state surveillance on families. Performing familial care. Care is a gendered role that is culturally experienced and performed. It is a complex context that is impacted by social and structural relationship outside of the immediate setting of the family. Differences such as that of caste, ethnicity, and the larger context mark the way the role of caring is performed. I quote, care can be a part of formal, loving, professional, and friendship relationships. It is fundamental to who we are and how we are viewed in both public and private spheres of life. Close quote. And in Kumkum Sangari argues, in the context of social reproduction, I quote, the borders between the insides and the outsides of the family are somewhat illusory. Close quote. Similarly, as care and welfare are socially produced and performed in the context of patriarchal militarized regime, the boundaries of family get entangled and, I quote, relentlessly erode the home as a safe and separable place. Close quote. So I begin with a small vignette. A friend of mine from Imphal narrated the story to me. This is the story where he told me that he was coming back late at night during the mid to late 90s. This occurred during the mid to late 90s. And they had gone out for a festive occasion as a young adult with a group of male friends from the same locality. They were stopped by the police. When interrogated, their youthful brashness elicited flippant responses, because of which they were beaten up, lashes on their calves and buttocks. On reaching home and narrating the incident, the elders responded to the situation with the statement, "Phare, noi laiming laure." That is to say, it is okay, your liming lauber has happened. Now, what is liming lauber? Among the Métis, liming lauber is a rite of passage after which one enters the world of adulthood. Though seemingly jocular, the elder statement suggests that in situation of political instability, with the inevitability of adulthood comes the inevitability of confrontation with security forces, which can be the army, which can be the police. So much so that confrontation with the security forces in itself become understood as a rite of passage through which boys become men. The elder's response implies the impossibility of families and kin protecting the youth from state violence. I quote, thus family formation falls within the purview of the state, its economic policies and legal instruments shape the familial domain, close quote. In the absence to recourse against state violence, care translates as asking the youth to be careful or to laugh off incidents of state violence regarded as minor transgression. In fact, rather than families and kin protecting one from state violence, it is possible that the very fact of being kin make one susceptible to violence. This is exemplified by the phrase marked by the phase marked by secret killings in another disturbed area, Assam, in the spat of extrajudicial killings around 1998 to 2002 that target non-state groups, but also target kins and family members and sympathizers of the United Liberation Front of Assam. Right. During the phase of the secret killings in Assam, family members were used by the state to pressurize ULFA members to surrender, failing which entire families were murdered by death squads. So much so that even the report of the state-appointed commission termed the killings as ulfocide. Right. So the possibility of extrajudicial execution of family members of suspected militants reveals that the legitimacy of the family as a sacrosanct unit of society is no longer tenable. The state gives legitimacy to the institution of the family. Likewise, fear of the disintegration of the nation state can make the state target the family as the microcosm of the larger ills that ail society. Right? Based on my fieldwork in Nong Mai Khong village, this fieldwork was done in 2011, and this happened about 2 years after the military Operation Summerstorm. I found that the villagers had not known about the operation. They did not know that the operation is going to take place. They had taken the presence of security forces to be part of regular patrolling. That also reveals something, right? How we are no longer how it is visually no longer striking to find lots of security forces patrolling your neighborhood. I found that the villagers, only when the firing and bombing started did they realize that it was a counterinsurgency operation. Nong Mai Khong is a fishing village. Many villagers have their ponds. During the operation, arms and ammunition were put in gunny bags and thrown into these ponds by non-state armed groups. After the operation, villagers were interrogated for arms and ammunition found on their property. And there is a story that became very striking at this point. Some of you would remember that as a part of this operation, a 12-year-old girl was arrested by a combined force of Assam Rifles and Manipur Police Commandos on 14 August 2009. Right? My fieldwork is after this. The police were looking for her parents after a member of the Revolutionary People's Front, one of the many armed groups in Manipur who had hidden ammunition in their pond, was caught. After he revealed the whereabouts of the hidden arms, the girl's parents were accused of associating with armed cadres. She was kept in police custody for 5 days to coerce her parents to surrender. And remember, she is a 12-year-old girl. At the same time, the family also started receiving threatening calls from the non-state militant group, warning that the entire family will be killed in case her parents surrender. However, they surrendered on the 6th day of the police commando stationed in their house. The mother was put in Central Jail, Imphal, and the father in Sajiwa Jail. for 3 months each. While it is difficult to gauge the deep impact that this incident has had on the relation within the family and on the 12-year-old girl, when I did my fieldwork, the family told me that the girl had started. Post this operation, this girl started getting fainting spells. So she would, she would be doing her activity and she would pass out for a few moments, and she was very, I did not interview her because she was very vulnerable. She was hiding from us. And we spoke to the parents and we spoke to the grandmother. The girl's grandmother had forced the police, the state forces, to also take her into police custody, stating that if the granddaughter is to be apprehended, she should be also taken along, because the grandmother was fearful of what will happen to the granddaughter. And the fear of what is going to happen to the daughter and the mother, right, made the parents finally surrender to the state forces despite threats from the non-state armed cadres. It thus seems that in disturbed areas, family relations are fostered and familial care is expressed in the face of threat to life. To care for one's kin and to protect them is therefore to make oneself vulnerable, as illustrated by the actions of the young girl's parents and grandmother. Care work in disturbed areas means risking suspicion, or worse still, caring for one's kin can result in torture or death. Right. Very quickly, I go to the next section, which is where I look at a short story titled "News of a Beloved Friend." In this section, I take another approach to elaborating my argument. In the context of violence, many social and political realities cannot be recuperated in their entirety. In my article, Fraud Fields Doing Sociology in Violent Times, I argue for an interdisciplinary approach, one that supplements field narratives by incorporating poetry and fiction. In field sites of violence, the most important field vignettes remain outside of the writing up processes due to reasons of safeguarding identity, as well as for the fact that many of the stories are shared in the understanding of confidentiality, even if not stated overtly. Thus, in Fieldwork Under Fire, representing the factual content of ethnography through fiction could be one of the methodological routes, especially when lives of informant depend on and are endangered by what factual details are revealed. As Bashir argues, I quote, literary narratives can play a bigger role in such inquiries on the everyday in states of terror, especially in a knowledge field like Northeast Studies, which is dominated by social sciences. Literary work impels us to readjust the scales of observation and analysis and to descend into and probe the minutiae of everyday life, close quote, right? So, focusing on the genre of short stories emanating from sites of violence, I explore the possibility of capturing how state laws are lived and experienced through friendship and kin relations. I do this through Sudhir Ranjan Moirangtham's short story titled Nungshiraba Marupki Mapau, which I translate as News of a Beloved Friend. Nahalpam Aruna has categorized Manipuri short stories into 4 stages, the last being that of the age of Mairik, 1970 to the present. She derived the term Mairik, translated as sparks, from a literary journal that stalwarts of Manipuri literature such as Shiribiren, Yumlembam Ibomchan, Nongmaikem Kunjamohon came together to publish. Their manifesto envisaged the task of writing short stories and sees it as a reflection of social changes, right? This is from Nahalpam's essay. This provides further justification for the use, right? But I will not, I think, I will not spend time on the methodological issues of fiction and poetry. I'll briefly summarize the story here. In this story, Nungshiraba Marupki Mapau, the unnamed protagonist is picked up by the state forces and is asked to name his friends. He is released from custody after he gives the name of his friends. The protagonist did not give much thought to this act of naming his friends. However, when he met another friend who apologized to him, saying that, "I'm sorry I gave your name during my interrogation," the reason of his arrest became clear to him. And now he suddenly became worried about the friends whom he has named during his interrogation. Fearing the safety of his friend Jeevan, he goes to warn him though not revealing to Jeevan that he has given his name during the interrogation. Jeevan laughs off the warning and responded, no one can be caught and taken into custody for no reason. He states that he did not need to worry on that count. The protagonist, hurt by Jeevan's remark, asked him, so there must be a reason that they had detained me as well. To which Jeevan replies in affirmative. In the later part of the story, Jeevan is shot at on the imputation of being a police informer. He was involved in a small business of buying things from the police canteen and selling them in retail. The protagonist is surprised that this violence could happen to Jeevan, who maintained that no one can be under the radar of suspicion without any reason. Right, so it's a very evocative short story. After he was released from custody, he heard rumors that he has been killed, implying that he was killed by state forces. Version of the rumor suggests that another person who shares the same name as the protagonist was killed. Right. So to be acknowledged as a friend in the process of interrogation might not be read as recognition of friendship, but that of betrayal. In the same vein, denying friendship might be read as loyalty. In telling this story of friendship, Sudhiranjan Moirangthem problematizes the category of friendship itself. This is not to say that the relationship of friendship in such situation, in such context is in crisis, but puts into question a socio-political formation where the network of friendship threatens life itself. One can be arrested by association or coerced to become an informant or be killed as one finds oneself in a web of suspicion by association. Friendship does not stand apart from the larger context within which it locates itself. In certain and untrustworthy totalitarian institutions, I quote, people are wary of regarding whom to trust and whom to befriend, close quote. For instance, when the protagonist hears many versions of his detention and torture, he asks himself, to trust or not to trust. Sometime after the protagonist was released from custody, he heard the news of his own death. Contrary to one's death being an event in someone else's life, in sites of violence, your death can be an event in your own life. One can die many times as well. The protagonist laughs absurdly, hearing the news of his death. His curiosity brings him to the mortuary to see his corpse. The corpse was bullet-ridden, wearing combat attire. The protagonist thought of the many men who had disappeared wearing their everyday clothes, but mysteriously seemed to change into combat attire when dead. He mulls over the identity of this other he who had died, tortured, and shot. This story implies that the person who was killed shared the same name as the protagonist, which leads to the protagonist to think about his multiple name. And this is a longish quote from the short story that I have translated. As for names, he has many. How many names does he have? And with how much love had those names been given to him? His grandfather called him by one name, his grandmother by another, his aunts yet another. On top of that, his birth name, his birth chart given name, the locality and the name on his certificate, many. That he is called by those many names according to who is addressing him. Isn't that a sign of their love for him? At that time, he used to think, so many loved him dearly. So this is the section from Sudhiranjan Moirangthem's short story. For the state, multiple names such as a lack of legibility, the subject becomes unknowable, moving between multiple names as it were. The same gaze of legibility is turned inward. An oft-repeated phrase, Eliaspo Yamadi Soidre. If one has many aliases, it is sure encapsulate this. The phrase suggests that if one has multiple names, it is sure that one is a suspicious character. It speaks of the practice of multiple names that one gives to one's kin, and yet one is made to look at one's own practice with suspicion, suggesting that the overarching climate of fear transforms the ways in which we look at each other through the lens of the state. consequence of the innocuous coincidence of similar informal names combined with tortured men blabbering out names of friends are life-threatening. In the article, Muslim Mothers in Times of Terror, Hamid describes how political climate transforms friendship. Muslim mothers fear their sons' friendship with those within the same religious community carrying overt markers of religion. Fearing their sons' association with cousins and friends, they pay attention to the people their friends are befriending so that their sons' names will not be uttered when anyone suspicious is picked up and interrogated by the police. Just as family formation fall within the purview of the state, one can argue that the state likewise, though less directly, control friendship through the production of vulnerabilities and fear. I come to my last section, and I will do this very briefly because I don't think I have a lot of time. And also my throat is giving me a lot of issues. So this is a section titled Scheming Violence. Sangari argues that, I quote, violence does not sit obediently in a separate compartment or segregated place, close quote. I explore this entanglement of violence of the outside to that of the inside, and meshing state violence with that of familial and kin relations. Right. This section points to the manifestation of the state. Sorry. The state and its policies in the lives of young men caught in a web of surrender drama. Right. So I refer to a lot of scholars working on the aesthetic of kinship, but I will go straight to this this term surrender drama. Nongkinri had argued that unemployment is one of the major problems of the youth in Northeast. He makes an interesting proposition that on the one hand, there is no government support for youth looking for productive and gainful employment. The few existing employment opportunities are negotiated through networks of nepotism and corruption. On the one hand, this is the situation that you need to have socio-political and economic network to have gainful employment. On the other hand, the government has created, I quote, employment packages, right? So Nongkinri is referring to these surrender, these schemes that are given to youth, to rehabilitate youths who have surrendered before the authority. Nongkinri states that the opinion of community leaders is that such a posturing from the side of the government would lead the youth, I quote, to think and act differently to enjoy the benefits of such employment packages, close quote. Now, what does Nongkinri mean by acting differently, that youths are going to act differently? By act differently, the community leaders are suggesting that youths might be tempted to avail the rehabilitation scheme as an employment opportunity. The immediate relationship drawn between unemployment and militancy means that unemployed youth are looked at as troublesome figures. The young man without gainful employment in Sudhiranjan Moirangtham's story falls into the category of troubled and troublesome figures, one who's immediately seen through the gaze of suspicion. Right. So so there is a scheme that you can look this up online also. It is titled Scheme for Surrender Come Rehabilitation of Militants in the Northeast. Right. So that is the background of this reportage that I'm going to read out. Right. On 10th January 2013, local news reported that 7 youths of Hairok Part 2 in Thaubal district in Manipur were taken to the camp of 42 Assam Rifle by a woman, Sagol Sem Ongbi Purnima, on the pretext of giving them jobs. In the camp, they were forced to sign a surrender document embossed with the word KYKL, Kanglayawal Kanalup, which is a non-state armed group, KYKL, MDF, Military Defense Force. The youth were promised a monthly sum of rupees 4,000, right? So this rehabilitation scheme, this money is being promised, is being told to this youth that this is salary. The youth were promised a monthly sum of rupees 4,000 to join the army in the name of KYKL MDF. And an additional sum of rupees 2.5 lakhs a few months after their recruitment. The youth revealed in a meeting with the media that it was only on repeated insistence to be released from the camp that they were allowed to go back to their respective families. This also led to some skepticism as to whether the youth would have been released by the paramilitary at all in the given circumstances without any tacit agreement. This surrender drama led to the Revolutionary People's Front, a non-state armed group, to release a statement warning and advising youth of parents, I quote, not to fall prey to such surrender dramas or let their children trapped by the false promise of the Indian military, close quote. This is from the Sanai Express newspaper. The Assam Rifles maintained that the youth approached the 42 Assam Rifles for surrender, but were returned after a preliminary investigation revealed that they were not part of KYKL MDF. The Inspector General Assam Rifles South described the youth leaving the camp as fleeing the camp due to instigation by underground elements. It is understandable why a group of friends lured by a woman living on rent in the same locality into the camp on pretext of gainful employment will be in the radar of both the army as well as the non-state armed groups. This case is not the only reportage of surrender drama that frequently unfolds in Manipur. I use this incident to look at the rehabilitation scheme that presents a certain language in which the youth are referred to. So there is surrenderee, surrenderers, recycled militants, right? So the scheme, if you look at the scheme, they say that we don't allow recycled militants, right? So if you have surrendered once, you can join and surrender again and avail the scheme. What consequences does this labeling of these terms have for the calibration of relationship of intimacy and friendship? What should resonate for us again is the enmeshed nature of mistrust of a community of people that AFSPA renders as suspicious, whose presence render the nation in danger, and the percolation of this mistrust in interpersonal relationship such that revealed by this incident reported in the newspaper as surrender drama, where a woman in kinship terminology will be Laikai gi ini, fictive kin, and aunt of the Laikai, a supposedly trustworthy figure has assured this group of friends of finding gainful employment. The woman's husband was reportedly a surrendered insurgent affiliated with the Assam Rifles in some capacity, right? So what capacity, we don't know, but but this husband was present within the camp when this was happening. A Laikai, locality is not a very good translation, but let's use locality for now. But a Laikai is a fairly close kin unit also, right? You may find that one Laikai has the same, like I'm Soibam Haripriya. Soibam Laikai will be like, a lot of Soibam will be staying in the same locality. So it's supposedly a close kin unit. It can be a settlement of kin and is sometimes named after the surname of those, settled there. Though regardless of whether one is a blood kin or not, one is a fictive kin. So much so that marrying within the Laikai is not considered desirable. So this act by this unlike figure in the locality, a breach of trust, such as the negotiation of trust and mistrust that one performs in kin relations and friendships. On 11 January 2013, it was reported in the newspaper that some Assam Rifle personnel came looking for youths who were supposed to take part in the surrender drama. One can speculate that this was done to again coerce them into false surrender. The Naga regiment also came in the same locality looking for Purnima. the woman who had organized the surrender drama. Ibetombi, the mother of one of the young men caught up in this incident, revealed that she has been struggling to ensure her son receives proper formal education. How young men from vulnerable family situations become easy targets to be represented as beneficiaries of rehabilitation schemes can be seen as a part of the unfolding relationships between militarization and material insecurity. Such vulnerabilities are easily exploited by trusted kins or friends, right? So Athar Zia also writes of, in her ethnography, Resisting Disappearance, of how young men joins the Special Task Force cadres, and even after they discontinued the association with the Special Task Force, because this is seen as active collaboration with the Indian military apparatus, friendships fall apart, right? Such pervasive acts of non-acknowledgement of friendships can be considered within the same framework. However, rehabilitation schemes such as the above may also be the only few possibilities of survival for some section of the population. Thus, the likelihood of youths trying to avail such schemes by themselves cannot be negated. So I'll come to very quickly to my conclusion. In this talk, what I was trying to do was look at the relationship between friendship and kinship fostered in conflict sites. While deceptively simple, the lack of works on friendship pursued in the context of protracted
Jay, you're unmute.
Okay, how long have I been unmute?
No, it's just half a minute. Yeah, I was trying to mute
Okay.
someone and by mistake I mute you. Yeah. Thank you.
So in conclusion, relationships of friendship and kinship is my interest that I was trying to pursue in this talk. While deceptively simple, the lack of words on friendship pursued in context of protracted violence meant the necessity of reading them alongside documents that exist in other registers too, such as fiction. Within studies of kinship too, the ways in which familial and spousal violence become more pronounced in situation of violence, while given heed to, especially by drawing from data collated from civil society organization, the actual work of family and care, which is the grain that marks kin relations, are missing in such, works. So what I wanted to do was explore some of these gaps and look at how everyday violence frames kin relations and friendships, such that trust and suspicion co-constitute such relations, right? So I think with this I will end the talk. There are a few things which I would like to explore in the question and answer section, but what I clearly wanted to do was look at how negotiation with trust, trust is foundational to relationships, but how negotiation with trust and, how trust becomes one of the collateral damage of lives in disturbed areas is what I was looking at. And yeah, I would end my talk here. I'm sorry for the multiple disturbance. My throat is not doing too well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jaypriya. This is a brilliant overview and also a detailed explanation of your latest publication. Some of us have read it. I'm sure some people in the audience have also got a chance to look at the paper. If you haven't, you have time to read this paper and also get back later. But yeah, now's the time for us to have a Q&A. Feel free to use a chat box or just raise hand option and yeah, shoot the questions. Yeah. Anybody who has, okay. So before I start collecting questions, I want to ask, I read this essay long back, long back in the sense a month ago. When was that field work conducted, number one, and also when was this story written? Because it also shows a lot about, okay, because the conflict, as we all know, has also undergone like multiple shift over the ages, right? Afasfa in 1980s or insurgency in the 80s is not the same as Afasfa maybe in 2010. So would you like to tell us like the time period in which the fieldwork was conducted, or the stories that your interlocutors were sharing? Okay, I have to unmute. Yeah, I think you are muted. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So Sudhir Ranjan Moirangtham's short story, it's a collection of short story, and Nushiraba Maruki Mapau is the title short story. This was published by Fiction Club in 2004. And while meeting the family of those affected by Operation Summer Storm was done in 2011. This was part of my fieldwork, and though my thesis was on something else, not on friendship, but I revisited this, for this book chapter. And you are right. I think all of us, I think for people, some of us growing up in the 90s, it's a much more different kind of reality. But also now, I think so we see, the kind of violence that one looks at is very different in multiple phases. But I think one of the ways in which looking at trust becomes a trigger for my work is because of my own fieldwork and because of multiple fieldworks of my students working in conflict sites, where if they themselves are not from conflict sites and they go to conflict sites, one of the first things they tell me is that, there are many groups and organizations working for the same cause, but no one seems to speak to each other. They're very mistrustful of each other. And that led me to think about this idea of trust and mistrust and why it is supposedly so prevalent in certain sites as opposed to other. And I was thinking of the ASPA regime and such coercive networks as, endangering such network of trust and mistrust. So that clearly is where I sort of want to look at. I do not want to think of people as inherently mistrustful, but what about a certain context? What about a certain, militarized context does that? And I want to sort of also look at scholarships around totalitarian regimes, because this idea of trust and mistrust is also so much prevalent in, other such very militarized, very totalitarian regimes as well.
Yeah.
I
Thank you for.
hope.
Yeah, thank you for. I mean, this is an excellent sociological analysis of, if not in a side of conflict or militarization, but it could be taken out, extrapolated as an interesting study of how trust and mistrust are also constructed or shaped by different socio-political factors. Anybody who studies trust and affect can also use this as an example. And yeah. Yeah. We have a couple of questions. Somebody has Chandan wants to know, studying gender and conflict in Northeast India, why is it important to revisit fictional stories, given the interpretations evolve over time and oral histories of shifts with its reading? So, Therapy, you talk about doing methodological experimentation, the need to visit poetry and fiction, which you have written elsewhere in your earlier works, but if you like to say a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Chandan. This is an important question methodologically also. I think foremost is also a concern around ethics, because how does one tell stories about violence that people have shared with you on a tacit understanding of confidentiality, right? And especially in areas where conflict, of protracted conflict, where the conflict never ends. How does one look, because the solution to that is not telling the stories. The solution to that is telling stories by other means, right? So, which is where I think we have to be creative with the sources that we are looking at. And I refer to Nahakpam Aruna's article, which is a theoretical understanding around how to look at the phases of short stories. Arambam Ongbi Memchobi also has a very good essay called on post-colonial Manipuri literature, and she also looked likewise. She also analyzed likewise so her time period is 1980s onwards, and for Aruna, Nahakpam Aruna, it is 1970 onwards. This is a phase where one is looking at realism in literature. And I was thinking of how these kinds of, why they're terming this, the age of spark, the age of a real, quote unquote, the real authentic literature as opposed to the romantics of the previous time, right? So there is a way that readers and literary critics are looking at this phase as a representation of, of lives as it were, which many times one see that lacking in some of the phases, in some of the audiovisual, like cinema studies, where the background of militarization is not very present. It can be a love story at any time and place, right? But in the literature, one sees a very strong kind of idea of representation and telling stories come in, right? And so I look at written texts. I don't look at oral histories, but oral histories are also important. I think the beauty of oral history, and you say that oral history shift with each retelling, but what does the shift tells you, right? What does the shift in each retelling tells you? And the shift is where our interrogation should lie, because the idea of an oral story being told to us and how that story itself shifts. And the stories are also full of, a lot of the stories are cautionary tales, right? So when, stories of friendship can also be traced to a lot of folk tales about, and these folk tales are so, the idea even goes to actually some of the folk tales also, between which are stories of friendship, also tells about a friend giving his wife to a friend when he's going for a long sojourn elsewhere, and asking the friend to take care of the woman in all aspects. And what does this means, right? So it's very, while, stories, fictional stories, I think the way in which it evolves around time, the way in which the shift, the evolution and the shift itself contains a lot of material for us to sort of unpack, right? And how do I ensure these narratives create an impact is by reading this against other kinds of erasure, right? So how does one look at these erasures is very, very important. If one part of the archive or one part of the field is silent, can we find it elsewhere? That has been my, my effort, if I am answering your question.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. I just wanna like chip in here. I mean, it's not just about what people say. The content, as Chihavya was saying, it's not just the content, but also the form, the ways in which people are telling the stories. Like, are they repeating it, or are they like deliberately not telling something, right? So there are deliberate silences, there are deliberate gaps. There's certain changes that one makes while telling a story, right? So I think the focus should also be on the form of telling or retelling the story or the account, and not always on what's being said, because our content can be packaged in so many ways. And as those of us who study text, we know very well that form matters a lot more than the content. Yeah, and Girija, can you please share the next question? Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is by Rajkumar Panthoirin, and he asks, in Manipur, across communities, it is common to find close relatives where, for instance, one is a high-ranking police officer while other is a human rights activist. These two entities often mutually suspicious of one another in conflict zones. Even if there is a seeming lack of political or professional compatibility of the two, kinship relations perhaps inflect this incompatibility in a certain intimate manner that has to do with some sort of an elite safety net. So, and he asks, how do we understand such weird relationships?
Thank you, Rajkumar Panthoiren. It's a very complicated question. But this is the reality of the field of violence, and that is why in the talk I said that let's not think of the state as also a state out there, also a state which is located in New Delhi. There are agents of the state and representatives of the state within the community. There are ways in which people within the community are affiliated to different kinds of positions, right? And that is why when we think of the idea of legitimacy, illegitimacy, the idea of what is lawful, what is unlawful, a lot of it are also gray areas that we look at. I know this conversation will go up in YouTube, but I'm very glad that when I was doing my PhD, my brother had not joined the police yet, because my access to field information would have been very different. Right. So, and also, like, how do we think about, forget close relatives. We have, for instance, siblings, husband and wife, one who's an activist, one who's a bureaucrat, right? So, and I think I have no straight answer to looking at how to sort out this incompatibility, right? But there is also a way in which I think you said something very important, which is something to do with elite safety net, right? And I think I'm very grateful to you for bringing this up, because I think all of us, in spite of having certain stances, are also in terms of safety and vulnerability in very different positions because of socio-cultural positions within the community, right? So, and activists on the ground may be very different in terms of safety position as opposed to someone with certain kind of ties, right? So these kind of we understand this not just as weird relationships. These are kin friendship and human relationships that are inevitable in sites of violence, right? One of my friend, Josefa Pandit from Kashmir, he wrote this very interesting thing on Facebook, which is when he spoke about a group of a large group of young men who had turned up for recruitment in the Kashmir police force, and there were too many people. So I think the gates closed, or not so many people were allowed to enter because there were too many people looking for jobs. And then the young people, because they were refused, there were a lot of agitation because they were refused entry, and then they shouted Azadi slogans and left. And we were thinking of how do we understand something like this, right? How do we understand the fact also in Manipur that maybe there are only two kinds of jobs available, that of a teacher and joining the police, right? There are no other spaces available. There are, how does one then situate oneself, one's own position, situate oneself as an employee of the government, and yet have, how do I want the security of a government job, but also then question the ideology of the state, right? So these are very sort of interesting and these are not network that can be easily teased out. But I'm very glad for you bringing up this thing that is so prevalent.
Okay, thank you so much for making all the effort to answer the questions. I know you're having a bad throat, and you can definitely take like a minute break or yeah. I just want to read out the next question, which is slightly longer, so they will also give you time to rest your throat. This is from Divanjali Biswash, and she says, "Hey Haripriya, great presentation. Eager to read a full paper. Quick questions. Have you thought about Dolly Kikon's framework of Morom for the social bonds in a comparable context of militarization that you bring to attention?" All right, so this Morom, okay. And then the next question is, would you be able to extend the scope of your work to ethnic kinship? Or do you see this having possibilities of strengthening intra-ethnic ties through the Manipur region? As Arnapal mentions, shift in the nature of violence, where can trust be placed in the last years as shifts did occur in certain relations? Yeah, these are two really interesting questions. One talking uh, in relation to Dolly Kikon's Morom framework. Another one is the intra-ethnic ties. Yeah, Manipur.
Thank you, Devanjali. The question of, so here, I would like to highlight that when I'm talking about trust and mistrust in protracted conflict, looking at scholarships around friendship, I'm not saying that trust and friendship is the only prevailing ways in which friendships is practiced in protracted violence, nor am I saying that trust and mistrust is not prevalent in friendships and kinship relations in other situations. But I'm trying to tease out how, how the AFSPA regime co-constitutes familial relations, co-creates and co-constructs familial relations in such a way that this also becomes the way in which friendship is organized, and how surveillance, right? And by surveillance, it's not just state surveillance, but how parents are very invested in, surveillance of the friendship of children for fear of, of children being, of their offspring being led astray, the kind of influence that, bad company can have, so on and so forth, right? So I think that the framework of Morom is, when I say that friendship and kinship in certain situations of violence, and the story of the 12-year-old girl who was taken in police custody and the grandmother saying that you have to take me along in custody, is also a framework of care, is also a framework of care. And unfortunately, there is so less scholarship around how is care performed in conflict situation. And that is where I want to sort of, bring this idea. The second question on shifts in the nature of violence and ethnic ties, important question, tricky question to maneuver as well. A lot of, the elephant in the room is the present day violence and conflict and the possibility of friendship in these contexts. And a lot of my friends and younger friends and people I'm associated with professionally as well talk about how friendship, how there is a very, how friendships between communities, between supposedly warring communities are still performed, and how they are performed in a very delicate way, as in such a way that they don't talk about political things, quote unquote political things. And I found that very poignant, because these are people who are trying to maintain a very delicate framework of friendship, where they want to maintain friendship, and they are both wary that certain conversation can impact that friendship, and one is invested in continuing that friendship. And I found this, skirting around issues and trying how best to talk about it, or to completely, keep that under the radar and talk about other things and meet and have other conversations and meetings where certain things are not spoken about. Very, like I said, very poignant, because one is talking, is that also a framework of care that, that you are practicing, that you still want to maintain that friendship, you still want and you're hoping for another time when this can be in the past and one can talk about certain things, but one is in the eternal postponing of talking about certain things. And I think that these are also framework of care that one is practicing very, very in a very tightrope manner. But I found this, there's also a ethics of practicing friendship between people.
Thank you so much for that answer. Is there anybody else who has a quick question? Just chime in. Uh, we have around half an hour, so we have enough time, questions and answers.
Can I quickly take a 2
Yeah,
minutes break and get a glass
sure,
of water?
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. If people have questions, feel free. You can also take this time to frame a question. Some of us know Haripriya very well, but for those of you who are here, first time meeting her, interacting with her, this would be an excellent opportunity to interact with her and get to know her and her work. Yeah, we have around 27 people online right now. Is there a question like and Louis? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, I had
Yeah,
to get some water.
yeah. Thank you. Jeffrey, I was also thinking that, you know, all your work, including the one that we're talking about right now, um, this is a very different work compared to the kinds of, scholarship on peace and conflict studies and on Manipur or in general as such. So I also want to ask, like, what inspired you to do the kind of work you were doing, right? It's very humanistic in nature, dealing with stories, dealing with even fiction, of course, different kind of text, different kind of methodologies that you're dealing with. And to talk about friendship and kinship, in a conflict situation, and of course, the political situation in Manipur right now is rife with hatred and mistrust, right? So much of tension in the air right now. So this would be like a more grand philosophical questions. And what's the need? Why do we feel the need to talk about kinship and friendship at this point? Adugi, I'm sure you wrote this. I don't know when did you start writing this, and also it's coming out at a very important time right now. And yeah, so I would like you to share a bit.
So I would like to begin by saying that because it's also a reflection on the time now, and there's a lot of ways in which there are in in oral narrative as well as real life narratives about friendship between communities. These are, of course, stories that I would like to tell now. But I don't want to come across as using these stories in an instrumental way. So thinking about friendship, because in this work, I'm looking at friendship between one community, right? But I think the larger question is the possibility of friendship in protracted violence. And that is something very important for me. When I shared this same work in JNU, I felt really happy at the end of the day when the questions came around intercommunity friendship, because I find that very hopeful in a time like this to talk about intercommunity friendship. A research scholar, I don't know if he's here, a research scholar spoke very, very, he told it, about his friend's father, and the relationship the friend's father shared, intercommunity friendship, and how this young man's friend, who is Kabui, his native friend gave him a few cows, or one cow. And this was when the Ithai barrage was built and some of the grazing land was being flooded. And this person was telling the story of his friend, that his friend was going home because his father was unwell, and his father was unwell because the cow was lost, and he stopped eating and he stopped drinking, and he was like, Itau, Itau Sanaba. He was like, this is my friend's gift to me. And the young man, the son, was saying that he doesn't care whether we eat, whether we drink, whether we are sick or not, but this loss of a cow actually led to a deterioration of the health of the father, right? And I found this really it's just so heart-wrenching as a story to talk about friendship, and especially friendship between men, because men, I think, because of the way we are socialized, the kind of expressions that are allowed in friendship between women is very different to friendship between men, and that the father held on to this, living being as a remnant of a certain kind of friendship, and it led to a complete deterioration of the health of the father, and I think it became a life-threatening situation. And I just thought that the stories like this are so interesting to be told about how people also, this is also a resilient kind of friendship in which people are, so my larger idea is around a very invested interest in friendship, and also to think about what are the possibilities of friendship currently, where one can another question that I was asked was around ideas of belonging, and how do we, because how does one think of homeland as exclusive or not exclusive, or how do we in our process could evoke a sense of belonging? Again, two contexts in which I just thought that the idea of you can also belong to certain relationship, not just something concrete as land, concrete as so I remember, not in this context, I'm sorry, I'll just bring in another story, which is a story of that was told to me, I think, a few years back, when this old man a non-Métis old man said that I used to go to Imphal once a year to go to the central library. And after the burning of the library, I no longer find reason to go to Imphal. I enjoy my time, that few days in Imphal, staying there, accessing the library, going back. And I just think of these stories as also a kind of connection, right? So it is the love for literature, the love for books, the love for, a certain space. And how does, one think of these lost spaces as also telling certain stories, how these spaces can be created in new ways. I don't know, but this is a larger sort of investment that I have in thinking about spaces, in thinking about friendship, in thinking about all kinds of possibilities. I hope that answers your question. And also I love literature, and that has been a primary interest of mine. And I'm thinking of ways to how literature always becomes a very rich sociological text as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I was also thinking, apart from literature, a lot of the communication interaction in today's time is happening online, on WhatsApp, Facebook, whatever, across communities, crossing ethnic lines and whatnot. So I'm just assuming that in the years to come, of course, now it's a little difficult to mine data and analyze them, but in the years to come, I'm assuming that there'll be a plethora of narratives of different kind of communications, like cross-border communications, that will generate a lot of these narratives and theories around friendship and kinship and intimacies. Because what we are seeing and what people, I mean, what certain people love to show on social media is just the hatred and the polarizing narratives. But beneath that veneer, there is a tons of affect and and very strong friendships and um, um, thank you. I mean, I'm what I'm also trying to say is that what you have just written will also be a theoretical kind of entry point into, theorize. I'm just saying that your work is going to. I mean, it's part of my reading list, but I'm also assuming that people who are going to study relationships and friendships in extraordinary circumstances, I'm going to look at a work and build on it because there's so much of data and narratives out there already, right? So without much ado, I would like to share our other participants. Just read out for everyone's sake. Rashmita, who has asked, how do post-conflict societies attempt to rebuild kinship and friendship? It's interesting. It's post-conflict societies. How do they rebuild kinship and friendship networks after mass violence, both in the case of Manipur and shortly, if we can have a glance over international conflicts going on?
Okay, so to answer Rashmita, I think unfortunately, we have not had the chance to think about post-conflict because it is an ongoing one. And I think for work such as on post-conflict, you can look at Veena Das's work, Urvashi Butalia's work on partition, Veena Das's work, etc. That would be the kind of resources around, and Veena Das especially, because there is a lot of, ideas, a lot of, conceptual framing that she does around rebuilding kinship and friendship after, violence. But I think in the case of, this context that I'm talking about, unfortunately, we have not reached the sort of the space of post-conflict. We are still grappling with conflict. And also because we are grappling with conflict, it is very difficult to think and understand ongoing conflict. We are all involved in some way, affected in some way. So that is also why I chose to work on friendship, thinking of an earlier context and not the present day context, because prevalent under, a violence that is going on is very difficult to take a step back and, theorize, conceptualize. I hope there will be a time to sort of do that, but unfortunately, now is not the time to sort of think about in that coherent manner, right? If we can, I think international conflict I mean, one can also look at, I mean, unfortunately, I feel that this is a time where we have the Third World War going on and none of us acknowledge it as such. There are international conflict going on. Look at Russia, Ukraine, the genocide in Palestine. Look at all these, this is a very, unfortunately, I feel a time of right-wing authoritarian leadership. So you can see that this is a general trend that one is heading to. Maybe and I feel this will be a time that we remember in history as something so. Like I read this somewhere. There's a Chinese proverb which says, "Do not live in interesting time." And I think we are living in interesting time, unfortunately. And that's I don't know how to sort of. I think you can look up the international conflict going on. This is unfortunately the interesting time we are living through.
Yeah, thank you. We have one more question from Fabi. Since digital ethnography as a method is also one among your interest areas, have you thought about or tried to look at the implications of social media on those international relations, interpersonal relations, right? Especially in the wake of the ongoing conflict, and even to the extent of exploring these implications on the virtual interactions, acts of love and care with the kin members residing outside the state, doing ethnography. Digital ethnography. Yeah.
Thank you, Yaifabi, for your question. Yes, digital ethnography is one of the new things that I'm trying to look at, because the digital is something that is so commonplace. We all have our digital lives. We all have, we all are living our lives partly online as well. The implication of social media on interpersonal relationship is very interesting. I feel that, I feel fortunate to live at the time, growing up at the time where we do not have social media, because I feel that in the absence of spaces to express, social media becomes a go-to space to express. And unfortunately, what is happening in social media is that the opinion we have at a time when we may have been very overwhelmed, and so you may say things, or you may share things online which then have a life of its own beyond the immediate utterance. And I think that is what is sort of, for me, something that is to that is that I have to reflect on while looking at social media, because the kind of proliferation that is possible, the kind of it is not simple as a conversation between two friends, right? Or a few friends. It is every sort of your footprint on the digital space have possibility, a potential of being multiple, right? And so I have not looked at social media in the context of this ongoing conflict, especially because I want to I feel very there are too many things that are happening online, and the extent of the kind of very graphic things that are shared is something that that also, that one may, I'm not saying that it is possible to stay away from the reality of violence, but I also think that one of the things that we have to caution ourselves about is whether we are embedded in it. In what capacity are we embedded in these sites? Right? The question of whether we are affected by something, the question of whether we are also voyeuristically consuming something, is a very thin line while having our online lives as well. And this exploration is something that I want to ethically sort of consider for myself. are we, the things we consume as researcher, the things we consume as people who are invested in the question of violence, as people, the things we also want to, voyeuristically consume are all enmeshed together, and our very, even violent desires get embedded in what we consume. So how do we think of teasing out this implication is the larger ethical question that I'm grappling with before embarking into, an understanding of that space. Yeah, I hope that, that answers your question partly.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Haripriya, I was also thinking this is to talk about the ethic. One thing about you just use a phrase, having a life beyond the immediate utterance. And many of us are very careful of the digital footprints whenever we apply for a job. Anybody can look up anyone in today's time and see what all you have written and posted everywhere. It's a world which is so open and so transparent. Uh, so what we saw in the ongoing conflict, which is kind of subsided in today's time, is also particularly men from both communities have posted a lot of pictures and videos online in a feat of in the heat of the moment. And although they did it in the heat of the moment, but this does also endanger their life, right? I mean, this can have long-term implications, like legal implications, or this can hamper the prospect of even getting a job, or even getting a lot of things in life that in future that they might want to fulfill, right? So I was just thinking of the long-term implications of this, that you know, it's not just the act of belligerence that one act of belligerence, but something they posted online can have a longer term implications and damage, which unfortunately we are not trained to. I'm not saying that people should hide or not hide, but yeah, the the lasting implications. It's really unfortunate. Um, but yeah, we have 5 minutes, so it's good time to have like two questions or one question and and a final comment. Um, Oh, Jay, I was also thinking that now, since no one is has a question right now, if you're doing digital ethnography, because digital ethnography or digital methods often rely on like big data, right? Okay, big data, right? Whereas I've seen in most of the works is it's mostly the data size is small, but you do like very close reading, incisive reading of those stories and ethnographic accounts. So. How do you switch to a method like digital ethnography or digital humanities? Yeah, what kind of, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so in digital ethnography, I mean, of course, one can look at the way of looking at big data and also source out a smaller narrative within looking at big data. But my work is not at all around big data. My work is at looking at, so the work around digital ethnography that I've done is looking at videos of
Mm-hmm,
violence on women that are shaming videos, right?
mm-hmm,
So this is also very much prevalent in Manipur for the
mm-hmm,
past few years.
mm-hmm,
The practice is not new, but
mm-hmm,
sharing it online is a new thing,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
Where, nupi kongoy na bagi,
mm-hmm,
uh, that is a
mm-hmm,
practice that existed, but now we have an online footprint of that also, right?
mm-hmm,
Where people are using the online as an added layer to the shading,
mm-hmm,
right? And therefore,
mm-hmm,
one is, this thing of viral chathalura, like
mm-hmm.
that is a threat. Like
Right.
I will make you go viral is a threat that is now uttered in everyday conversation when you are, in a threatening manner. And I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to, so my entry into digital ethnography is around my larger concerns on gender, around, violence, etc., to see how people, what are the, ways in which people share this, and the comments around such shaming videos shared on YouTube and such channels seems to be also centered around, as far as my ongoing research is concerned, seems to be centered around ideas of collective dignity, ideas of, how Métis women should behave, should not behave, right? Whether they should dance in this manner, whether, by wearing a certain attire, the dignity of the, the community is questioned, right? So I'm looking at sort of the digital presence of such videos of shaming, the kind of comments which are almost around, always around how the culture is deteriorating. And actually, the kind of comments is also, it's not, the interface is new, but but we have not, we have we are still relying on the idea that women are going to be women are going to produce and reproduce culture, women are going to uphold culture, and ideologically women should within them, hold on to this ideology. And the only way to sort of censor, the only censorship that works is a self-censorship, right? So there's a very sort of so while methodologically new, unfortunately, the kind of findings or the kind of debates around this has been something that is very
Right.
perennial, not something it does, but it's interesting how more and more the digital is also used to further such kind of interest. I would feel patriarchal masculinist interest in the bodies of women.
That's super interesting. And I just want to take 30 seconds to share, like, in a place like Manipur, in highly repressive societies, repressive, like under culture of militarism and economic precarity and so on and so forth, moral panic and cultural panic are very common. And oftentimes, moral panic and cultural panic um, originates from a patriarchal ethno-nationalist kind of an origin. And the panic often displays onto the bodies of women. And there's a lot of literatures on that. And JRP has just pointed out how women are often asked to uphold cultures. And the kind of work you're doing is really interesting. Um, and yeah, thank you for spending time with us. We are almost time. Um, we will clip some parts of it and upload it on YouTube, and I'm sure everyone else really enjoyed our interaction. We will have our monthly. We'll keep going with the monthly lecture series. We have one in early April, and we'll send out the schedule as soon as possible. Thank you, Jerry, once again.
Thank you for having me.
Can I do one thing? Can we just take a picture? If people, this will take like half. This is for our Instagram post. If those of you who could just turn on your
I'll stop the recording now here.
just stop